Hi folks, prior to start with this tutorial, a small announcement. If you are visiting Portugal within 3 weeks, our Scale Modeling Club organizes its annual exhibition on the 15th and 16th of June. It will take place in the city stadium of Leiria, so in the center of Portugal. Okay, let's jump right in. To start with any type of construction, I think a planning phase is important. For this planning phase, you have to define what will be the dimension of your construction, and you can help you out with a real life picture. That's exactly what I did for this little stone barn. Here is my little model coming right out of the internet. Obviously, I did my own little personalization on this building, and unfortunately, as you can see on this picture, there is no human reference, so it's quite difficult to assess the right dimension. The only elements we can see is that the frontal door is a double door. The timber beams on the lateral sides suggest that there is probably more than one floor, and the roof is done with slates. So what are the dimensions that I've decided to use? Here they are. The main door has a height of 7 centimeters and a width of 6 centimeters. You have the dimensions in inch on the screen, just enough to accommodate a hay cart or a World War II tractor. You know, they were quite smaller than the actual ones. Here are the different building dimensions. I'll let you read. You've got all the values in centimeters or in inches. As you can see, I started first with a cheap polystyrene scale model prior to cut my high-density XPS styrofoam. Actually, it's a good idea to verify all the proportion of the future diorama. Okay, time to rock and roll. It's now time to cut our XPS foam. So watch out here, you need styrofoam having at least 30 to 35 kilo per cubic meter. That's a requirement if you want to sculpt your bricks correctly. To do this, I used the Proxon Thermocut 230E. It's a nice machine that costs about 100 to 150 euros. The only drawback of this piece of equipment is that it has a small cutting table. So personally, I built an extension table with some pieces of wood, as you can see on these images. The huge foam panels have been reduced to smaller sections, having 2 centimeters thickness. Each wall panel was then cut at both extremities at 45 degrees just by moving the wire position. You can use, like me here, a protractor. The cut is clean, and do not throw away the residual parts of these cuts. We will use them to solidify a little bit the construction. We will then cut the 2 triangle extensions for the roof, and it will be time to glue everything in position. To fortify a little bit the construction, I use some skewer sticks that were also glued in position. For all assembly, I use PVA glue. As I explained earlier, I used the remainder of the wall section cut to solidify a little bit the interior of my construction. Watch out here, an interesting observation with regard to gluing foam panels together. Always try to apply your glue far away from the sculpted areas. So this is what you can see on these images. I apply the glue far away from the wall edges, because this is the location where we will have to sculpt the details in the foam later on. Watch out, because the PVA glue, once dry, is fairly hard. So in this case, if it reaches the corner edge, it will hamper your sculpting procedure later on while you will be sculpting the different bricks. Oops, I forgot to cut the door. No sweat, just cut it with the hobby knife. Okay, we can now close the building. Let's insert some skewer sticks in the corners just to stabilize everything, as the PVA glue is quite long to dry completely. Okay, here is a global view of the main body of this building. I applied some paint masking tape on the corners. Don't use the Tamiya one because it's quite expensive. Mine is Dexter, and you can buy that kind of product in any kind of do-it-yourself store nearby your house. You can clearly see here how I reinforced the structure on the inside of the different corners. We can now glue the little triangles on top of the house using the same method with the skewer sticks. So again, here with the PVA glue, watch out, apply it on the inner side of the house, just to be sure that this glue won't hamper your sculpting procedure on the outer surfaces. At this stage, there are still some little gaps at the junction of the different panels. No big deal with that. They will be filled in later on. We are almost done with the main body of this house. I have to sand it to remove the cut residues of foam. The hot wire machine has the tendency from time to time to leave some little hairs of foam left and right. So I sand a little bit all the surfaces with a 1000 grit sandpaper. Our little barn has a curved section above the double door. No need for extensive measurements here. It's a stone barn, so we can draw this curved line freehand, and we will remove the excess of foam with the hobby knife. We can now start the sculpting procedure of this barn body. Just like we did for the bridge of Ramel. You can find the link in the description below if you haven't seen this video yet. We start the sculpting procedure by drawing all the stones one by one. Obviously, we won't try to have a 100% match on the original picture. The idea is, just like for the bridge of Ramel, to try to identify what are the main sections of this construction. Here, for example, these vertical stones above the main doors are quite specific on this construction, so I try to reproduce them just like other bigger stones. As explained in my video of the Ramel's bridge, the idea is to work randomly, drawing first the biggest stones before filling all the walls with the smallest bricks. When looking at the picture, we clearly notice that almost all the stones are different, so there is no specific pattern to follow. This drawing process is quite quick and should be done completely at random. Here is the part where I did the monkey. I think I do the monkey at least once per project. So here comes the moment where you see appearing on screen. Don't try to reproduce that at home. I plan to insert bullseyes on both lateral walls, and actually I did them, but using the wrong method. I plan to use my rotative drill with a wood drill with the right diameter, and I thought, yeah, it will enter the foam like butter. Actually, it didn't. The problem is that probably due to the high rotative speed, the drill created a hot point within the foam, and in the end the foam was damaged inside the hole but also around the hole. So don't try to reproduce that. The right method would have been to draw the circle first and then to use the hobby knife just to open the circle and remove the foam with tweezers. In the end, I managed to correct this error by sanding the inside of the hole and by replacing the stones all around the circle that were damaged. The lateral timber beams were quite easy to reproduce, so I used for that small balsa wood sections, and I took advantage of my reference picture to evaluate a little bit the height at which these timber beams had to be located on my walls. I first draw small black squares on my walls to identify these locations. Then I opened these spots with my hobby knife. I removed the foam with tweezers, just like I should have done for my bullseyes. And afterwards I inserted inside these holes my little balsa wood sections. Each little balsa section has been shaped with the hobby knife and sandpapers. Balsa wood is really easy to work with, so it's a kind of a pre-weathering action. You can give all the type of damages you want to this balsa section with the hobby knife. You can damage the corners, all the angles, create cracks. It's really easy to work with. Once the sections were ready and the shape was pleasing to my eyes, I just put them in position with PVA glue. Okay, let's close this little barn with a nice slate roof. The first step is to use a balsa sheet of 1 millimeter thickness and to put one sheet on both sides. Here is the work so far, so let it dry a little bit. During this drying period, let's build some slates. Again, here all the slates have been done using XPS foam. So as you can see on these images, I've cut some XPS foam sheets of about 1 millimeter thickness. It's possible to cut even thinner than that, but I wanted to keep the capability to reproduce this kind of 3D layered appearance of slates, so it was necessary to maintain a given thickness. Following my reference picture on the web, I evaluated the size or the average size of these slates, and I decided to use 25 millimeters by 15 millimeters for these dimensions. To save time, once your drawing is done on one sheet, you can cut multiple sheets at the same time using obviously a sharp hobby knife. One specific item that I also wanted to reproduce on this barn was the sagging effect of the roof structure. The challenge here is that there is no complex timber frame below my slates, so I had to find an alternative to reproduce this sagging effect. So basically the idea I had was to glue below my balsa section some XPS foam blocks to be able to carve them. Now that the roof structure is completed, we can start the work on each individual slate. To reproduce the layer aspect of the slate, I used a new sharp hobby knife blade and I started to cut each tile with different sizes. I also damaged the 4 edges of each slate using the hobby knife blade, cutting the angles on the top surface, but also from time to time on the bottom one. And then finally I removed some material on the main body of each slate, cutting here and there parallel with the surface, and that's why you need a very sharp blade to be able to slice the foam. That's the reason why I judged necessary to work with slates a little bit thicker than within the reality. It's just to get this possibility to create damages and to reproduce a kind of layered aspect. Prior to glue the slates in position, I had some little gaps to fill in on the bottom side of the roof sections. So here again I cut some XPS foam sections and I glued them on top of the different bricks. Okay, our slates are now ready. We have a bunch of slates ready to be glued on the roof. So we will have to glue these slates on the balsa sections using PVA glue. Watch out here, you have to work from bottom to top as each top row of slates is superimposed on the next bottom row. Crossing the sagged area was a little bit chaotic, but I find my way to make it happen. It was sometimes necessary to add small pieces of foam in this hole. The idea was obviously not to curve the slates. These slates must remain straight, so it was a bit challenging. To completely close the rooftop, I had initially the intention to reproduce big stone blocks. So I cut, textured and glued on top of the roof these stone pieces, but it proved to be unaesthetic. So finally I decided to remove them and to replace them by slates to make it more realistic. Okay, now we have a complete barn. We can start the sculpting procedure in the foam. Nothing rocket science. What you need is a hobby knife with a very sharp blade. I really advise you to use a new blade to do this job, as any damaged blade could damage the foam during this procedure. All you have to do now is just cut all the lines you have drawn previously. The cut depth is something around 2 millimeters. To give a more rustic look to my barn, I've decided to leave the spacing in between the roof section and the bricks hollow. It was also time to repair the stupid things I've done with my bullseye, so here sanding the center and also removing some stones all around to replace them with new foam sections. It was also necessary to extend the sculpted area to the double door sides. As can be seen on the reference picture, this main door is located quite inside of the building. Once we have cut all the lines on our little building, we can now open all these lines with either a toothpick or, like me here, I'm using a dental curette. Whatever the tool you want to use, we use a small object to enter these cut lines and we try to enlarge them. You can also see on the corners, for example here, that some foam blocks have fallen and that the seam between the two foam panels is still visible. When we have opened all the cut lines, it's time to give texture to our foam. For this I used a skewer stick that was broken and I just punched the foam surface slightly to create this stone texture. We can also apply randomly some more pressure on some stone just to push them in to create a more rustic look and also enhance the 3D representation of our old stone wall. The next pre-weathering step that we will apply is to create some cracks with the hobby knife blade within some blocks, just like in the reality. So you create cracks and you can enlarge these cracks. What you can also do is remove some stone parts left and right. Time to tackle our wood elements now. As I told you, I did some personalization on this barn, going a little bit outside of our reference picture. I wanted to create two bullseyes, one on each side, and to close these bullseyes with wooden planks. Here again we work with balsa section, 1 millimeter thickness. We will shape two balsa discs with sanding sticks with the right diameter. Watch out with balsa wood, it's quite fragile, so you need to reinforce the disc with some wooden planks on the back sides if you want to sculpt some planks in the main disc. Take care with the wood veins, I mean the direction of these balsa wood veins. The second layer that you will glue on the backside of the disc should have its wood veins perpendicular to the wood veins of the circle. The idea is to avoid that the balsa disc splits into pieces while you will be sculpting the wooden planks. These wooden planks will be sculpted following the wood veins of this disc. The last step will be to glue a wooden stick on the backside of this panel just to help the positioning within the bullseyes. In order not to have any gluing seam visible and to avoid having to glue the wood panel edges, I glued within the bullseye 4 little foam blocks with PVA glue against which our wood panel would come in contact and will be glued. I used the same foam blocking devices for the main door of this barn. The barn door was done using the same balsa sheet. Watch out again here with the wood veins direction. Ideally these wood veins should be vertical. For easiness, the curvature on the top side of the door was shaped with a nail stick, progressively sanding until reaching the correct shape. Then only this door was cut into equal pieces and reinforcement have been placed on the backside again, just to prevent these balsa section to split into pieces while carving the different wood planks. Don't forget to cross the wood veins. As you can see, the balsa sections are glued together with cyanoacrylate glue. It's just to save some time. Personally, I prefer to use gel glue instead of liquid one in the case of the cyanoacrylate glue, as balsa is quite thirsty and will absorb quickly quite a lot of your liquid glue. I personally found the door on the reference picture a little bit too simple, so I searched the web and came across that one. So basically I had to add 3 more panels in red on this picture and 6 iron hinges in green on the picture. Watch out here for the wood veins direction. Again, I used the same balsa sheet for this work. Here again I brought my little touch, drilling some holes to simulate the presence of nails. For the hinges, I did some measurements to get a quite regular spacing between them, and I then cut the hinges within a brass foil having a thickness of 0.15 millimeters. The rounded edge of the hinges was done using a mini drill. That one is a 0.6 millimeter. After the bending of each brass section, I cut my foil at the right length. So basically we have for each hinges 2 parts. One long one attached on the door and a very short one, which is the support inserted within the wall. The presence of screw on the main hinges was simulated thanks to a sharp nail that was pressed on the back surface of the hinge with a lot of pressure. I guess you can reach an even more realistic appearance using a pension die set, but I don't have any at home, so I did with a little bit of creativity. Well, these doors look nice. Now all we still have to do is to carve the wooden planks. So here again we need to do some measurements just to reproduce realistic planks with the same width. Up to you to select the width that fits the best with your project. Personally for me it was ½ centimeter. Carving was done using a metallic scriber and a sharp hobby knife. Well, we have now 2 barn doors looking great. All we have to do is to fix them on the barn with PVA glue against the foam blocks that we already put in position. To facilitate the hinges construction, I used melted plastic sprue to realize the hinges axis. The final placement on the barn is really easy. You don't even need to glue the hinges within the walls. Just apply PVA glue on your foam blocks and glue the door in position. I also realized some scratches on the bottom side of my doors using the hobby knife and a metallic scriber. So I haven't spoken yet about the junction between the different wall panels. As you have seen earlier, some foam blocks have fallen on the corners during the sculpting procedures, and we still have an open seam between the walls. So it was necessary to fill these gaps with a specific paste. The product I used is a modeling paste. It's a polymer acrylic paste. It's really easy to use and fast drying, and once dry it's rock hard, so that's perfect. Another advantage of this product is that you can use it to realize textures. For example, I realized this aircraft carrier ground texture with this product. So it was quite easy with this product to reproduce the stone texture. You can also clean your paintbrush or the model with water. You can see here the difference between the left corner that was already repaired and the right one, which still need to be corrected. You see that some foam blocks are still missing as well. Last step prior painting, I told you that I wasn't really happy about the stones on top of the roof, so I removed these stones and I've decided to replace these stones by slates. It's much more, elegant and in harmony with the rest of the roof. Well, construction complete, it's time for painting, and we will start obviously with the primer application. Watch out with your primer. There are a lot of primers available on the market, but not all the primers are suitable to work with foam. For example, the Mr. Finishing Surfacer 1500, if applied on foam, will modify its structure, and you will see that the surface will melt slightly. So be aware of that, caution, and the best advice is always try to make some tests prior to painting or priming to avoid catastrophic results. Generally speaking, foam really hates all the enamel products and mineral spirits, so take care, especially with the weathering product, like you can find in the aftermarket, all these dark wash, dust effects and so on, natural effects, because most of these products are enamel based. I did, for example, extensive tests with the slimy grime product from Megamo, because I like this product to realize this greenish aspect on the bottom side of the wall, and it happened that this product was okay, but before applying it on my model I did testing, and I wait many hours after application to check the foam reaction. Take care as well if you use your airbrush. You see here I'm using the 3rd generation acrylics AK Interactive black primer. I apply it with paintbrush, but I also applied it with the airbrush from time to time, just because I wanted to reach some deeper crevices. In the case you want to apply a paint with airbrush and you dilute it with thinner, make other tests as well, because thinner might of course create adverse reaction with the foam. I started painting operation with the roof slates. For this I used basalt gray, the reference from AK Interactive, diluted with the AK Interactive 11500 thinner, and I applied this with the airbrush with a pressure of 2 bars and the needle of 0.4 millimeters. The dilution ratio I use generally with these acrylic colors for the airbrush was generally somewhere around 3 parts of thinner for 1 part of paint. These acrylic paints are quite concentrated with pigments. They are quite thick, so you really need to dilute these paints correctly, to mix them correctly prior airbrush application. The AK Interactive 11500 thinner is really nice, and personally I did not experience any clogging of my airbrush needle. Immediately after starting the painting with the airbrush, I noticed that my slates had a very porous aspect. In fact, what happened is that so long you cut the foam with the hot wire machine, with the thermocut, the final aspect is really smooth, just because the foam melted around the cut. The problem starts when you cut your foam with the hobby knife. These cuts create tiny holes a little bit everywhere, and you can really see the difference on these images between the hobby knife cut and the hot wire cuts, which are much smoother. So, slates having a quite smooth aspect, I was really pissed off, let's say, and I decided to find a solution. And that's where my polymer acrylic paste came against to my rescue. I decided to apply a thin coat of this paste on all my slates with a paintbrush. That way I was able to fill in all these tiny holes with this acrylic paste and to get the smooth finish I wanted for my slates. So immediately after application I restart my base coat with basalt gray and my airbrush, and guess what? The result was perfect. Here is a comparison on the right side with paste and on the left side without pastes, paint with basalt gray. Note how porous is the left side, especially on all these cuts done with the hobby knife. Okay, the base coat is done. Now it's time to create our mosaic of colors for the slates. You can use reference pictures again on the web to figure out what colors you have to use. Personally, I wanted to give a bluish color to my different grays. The rest is just mixing a bluish color with different kind of gray, from the darker to the lighter, and try to create a mosaic of different colors. The bluish gray I used as a reference was ocean gray. That's the paint that I mixed with the other gray references. So this first step here is ocean gray mixed with dark gray. The ratio is about 40% ocean gray and 60% dark gray. So with this mix, I paint at random different slates. I then add a little bit of gray blue in this mixture to realize other slates with a slightly lighter color. To create an even stronger effect and contrast, I then painted some other slates with pure gray blue. To create some darker slates, I mix a little bit of German gray with ocean gray. That was my last reference used to cover the last slates covered with basalt gray. Well, our mosaic of colors is done. We can now start the weathering, and I did the weathering with watercolor pencils, Faber-Castell. I use different references. Here are the 6 references that I use on this roof. For those who do not know how work these pencils, you just have to wet the surface with tap water, and then only when the surface is wet you can apply your pencil wherever you want and with the quantity you want. So basically these pencils are water-soluble pigments. As soon as the pencil enter in contact with the water, the pigments are released. It's a very easy process. You can always revert the process and correct, adding water and removing the pigments if you think your effect is too pronounced. So after the pencil application, it's necessary, just like for all paints, to blend the pigments. You can use a wet brush to blend these pigments on the surface. As you can see here, I used a flat paintbrush to blend the pigments. There are many watercolor references, so you can basically create all the effects you want: rust streaks, dust streaks, streaking grime. There is absolutely no limit with that. Here is the difference before and after. I think it's a very nice alternative to working with enamel products and oil paints with mineral spirits, for example. Prior to paint the barn, I noticed a forgotten item on the main wall. There is on the picture a kind of small stone structure that looks like a small table, working table. So I add this item on the front wall. And I also wanted to improve a little bit the side wall on the right side of my barn, adding a wood pile rain cover with slates. So these 2 items were done prior to paint the main barn. The wood pile cover was done using the same techniques we have seen to create the timber frames and the slates of the roof. So nothing new here. I then glued some little stones on top of this with PVA glue. It's winter, let's cut some wood for the fireplace. Given hiking in the mountain is one of my favorite activity, I always try to come back at home with a little bit of vegetation for my dioramas. I cut logs having about 2 centimeters length, and I also recover the sawdust for later on. It will be useful for the diorama. To create a realistic wood pile, you have to work with different diameters of wood sections, and then you cut them just like in the real world. Unfortunately, I guess I've selected the strongest wood species of the whole mountain range, and it was a hell of a fight to cut these logs. To realize the pile itself, nothing difficult. I used a styrene sheet and 2 foam blocks to limit the size of my pile and to stabilize it during the construction. I applied PVA glue in between each layers of log on the rear side, of course, just not to be visible at the end of the work. And I continue the work until reaching the desired height. To finish the work, I apply sand and gravel glue from Megamo with a paintbrush on all the logs on their rear side. Well, to complete the detailing of this little barn, I also wanted to include some metallic parts. So I used lead wire, 0.4 millimeters diameter, and some photo etch leftovers from previous kits to create the door handle, a keyhole, and an iron ring. Watch out, do not use a cyanoacrylate glue on your foam. Here the iron ring was glued thanks to PVA glue. Time for the base coat. We'll use rock grey and we will apply it with the airbrush. Dilution 3 part thinner, 1 part acrylic color. Stir this mixture correctly prior spraying it with the airbrush. I use 2 bars of pressure and my needle of 0.4 to apply this base coat with the airbrush. Just like what we did for the slates of the rooftop, we will then create a mosaic of color using different references to create bricks of different tint. Here again, the planning is essential and I advise you to search the internet for a reference picture. When I speak about color planning, I mean try to know in advance what's the result you want to achieve. For example, I'm building now a winter diorama for my VOMAG 88mm. I know that there will be a lot of snow in this diorama and that my vehicle is a German grey. So that means that the overall result might be monochromatic and dull. So in order to achieve a warmer atmosphere and to break this monotony within the colors, I've selected a yellow ochre stone appearance instead of the more classical blue-grey stones. Here is a reference pictures I use from the internet to guide my work for this diorama. I especially like this contrast between the ochre yellow and the red frame of the doors and windows. That was exactly what I was looking for, and this red color was also interesting to pop more and to break the monotony of the winter diorama. To achieve the complete mosaic of color for this barn, I applied 6 successive different steps, each step using different color references. Here are all the references I used in the correct chronology order so that you can have an idea about these colors. The step number 4 is my main reference color and was used for more than 80% of all the bricks. The other mixes were used only to paint a few stones left and right. The amount of stones for each type of color is only determined by your personal preferences and by your project. Our paint job is over on the different walls. It's now time to point our wall. I've been searching for a long time for the perfect product to do that. I did a lot of experimentation with different products, and I finally came across this paste here. I've bought it in a do-it-yourself store, which makes it much cheaper than the average product that you can find whether in skill modeling shops or in art stores. To give you an idea, this jar here of about half kilo cost me around €2. What's really interesting with this paste is that you can add acrylic color inside of it to already, as from the beginning, colorize the mortar that you will use to point your walls. It's a huge time-saving process because you don't have to paint or to colorize the joints between the stones after application. It's done as from the beginning. This product basically is just used in the construction sector to correct the wall's imperfections. It looks like plaster, but it is not plaster, and the drying time is quite slow. So even when adding acrylic color inside of it, you have plenty of time to work correctly without pressure. I really like the consistency of this product, It's quite liquid, but at the same time it has just the perfect consistency to enter all the cracks, crevices, and obviously all the joints between the stones, and that's what we are looking for. So as you can see, to point my walls, I just used the gray-green reference from AK Interactive that I added to my pastes until I had the correct color, and that's the color I used for the whole barn. You can make some trials. Generally speaking, your product should be darker when wet, because it has the tendency to turn within a much lighter color when drying. To point my walls, I used a silicone brush, a flat one, and I scrub all the stones slightly. Watch out not to apply too much pressure, not to damage the paint job that you did previously. And you continue that way, working by section of about 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters at a time. As you can see, the product is doing the job for which it has designed for, filling all the little imperfection at the surface. The next step is to use a piece of cloth, a very smooth one, dipped in tap water, and to scrub again all the stones to remove the excess of product. You can also use a wet flat paintbrush to smoothen a little bit all the different joints, or remove the accumulated product in the small stone holes. It's a very easy process. There is no specific difficulty. You just have to work step by step, working by small sections, and trying not to apply too much pressure on your silicone paintbrush. I worked the complete barn with the same piece of cloth. It is nevertheless important to clean it from time to time with tap water. As I said, what is really nice with this product is that you can mix it with acrylic colors. Here, for example, I did a specific mixture with burnt umber and black to reproduce a climbing humidity on one corner of the barn. The process remained exactly the same, so using the silicone paintbrush at first and then our piece of cloth to remove the excess. The pointing of our walls is over. You can see that there are still some holes remaining left and right, and I think it participates to the rustic appearance of our barn, so it's not so important to correct every little hole. We might leave some little gaps left and right, just like it is in the real world, you know. As I said, the pointing product did exactly the job it was designed for, by filling all the little crevices of the holes. To my opinion, because of the texture of my own stones, I found that there was a little bit too much of pointing product in the different textures of my stones. So I did some little corrections with a small paintbrush, applying a mixture of our British khaki and pale grey, a little bit more diluted with water, just to remove a little bit of these lighter tone spots. Painting our barn doors. Here is the reference pictures I used from the web to get my inspiration with the color and the faded effect. What we can notice on this picture is how this door was damaged on the lower side. You can see as well that the lower hinge is rusted, while the top hinge is not, probably protected by the slate roof on top. So I found on this picture quite a lot of information to paint my own barn door. I applied on my balsa wood a first layer of acrylic colors, a mix of white and beige red. I applied this paint with a paintbrush on my bullseye wood sections and on my barn doors. This first acrylic coat is important because it will reduce the balsa absorption capability, and it will also facilitate the use of oil paint to come. Initially, I was thinking to use a scratch effect product to make this weather effect with the paint. But looking closely at the reference pictures, we can clearly see that the transition between the intense red and our pink color is gradual. It seems that the intense red faded through the time due to the solar exposition and the element exposition. It's not like if the red coating had started to crack or had suffered scratches. That's why I've decided to use all paints. Here are the two references that I used to achieve my reference red. I didn't remove the linseed oil from my oil paints. I just applied them pure on this style and I mixed them together until reaching my desired red. I then applied this paint pure on my model with a small paintbrush. I didn't cover the whole section. Instead, I painted the wooden section at random, applying some paints mainly on the outer edges within the cracks and at some random location. I then used another paintbrush, a flat one with natural bristles, dipped in white spirit, and with this paintbrush I pulled my oil paint in all directions, mainly here vertically. The final blending of the colors is done with a very worn out old flat paintbrush having very short bristles, and with this paintbrush, which is almost dry, you tap the oil paint to blend the colors together. I applied the exact same procedure on the barn doors, obviously at a larger scale. The presence of our underlying acrylic coating helped a lot to blend all the color together, and that's the use of a paintbrush dipped in white spirit that will allow us to control the depth of this red color. I will then use a little bit of raw umber oil paint to create the dirt on these wood sections. Just like for the red, you apply a little bit of oil paint with your small paintbrush, and then with another flat paintbrush dipped in white spirit, you tap these oil spots gently to blend the colors. We will apply the same procedures on our barn doors. We try to concentrate this dirt effect on the lowest part of the doors, but also in the corners where the dirt can accumulate. Continuing the work with the oil paints, we will use burnt sienna and terra rosa to create rust streaks. We will apply these colors below our metallic elements like the iron ring and the handle. Watch out here because we have to work with white spirit to blend the colors, and you will tell me, watch out, white spirit and foam. Yes, it's true, there is a risk. Now, I did some testing, and using a brush which is slightly dipped in white spirit, it's not completely wet, there is absolutely no reaction. The foam, at least the foam I used, do not react negatively. Now, as I said, I do not soak my foam with white spirit. I try to remove a maximum of white spirit from my paintbrush with a paper towel before brushing the foam as I'm doing now. The fact that I primed my foam and I paint my foam with acrylic colors also give an additional protection to the foam. I then painted my lower hinge, the iron ring and the handle with dark rust reference from AK Interactive, and I then created chipping effect with the sponge technique using hull red reference from AK. I finally applied a highly diluted layer of medium rust on these two hinges. I completed the work on these two barn doors by creating grease effect around all the hinges. The paint mixture is a mix of raw umber and lamp black, around 50-50, applied pure around the hinges and then blend it with our flat paintbrush dipped in white spirit. Well, let's enter the last weathering phase for this barn. I told you that I really liked the slimy grime effect from Megamo. There are two references, a dark one and a light one. Watch out, these products are enamel products, so you have to make some tests on your foam prior to apply them on your model. For me personally, I did not experience any adverse reaction from my type of foam, so I decided to apply it. Remember, don't forget to prime your model and to paint it with acrylic paints. There are other alternatives like using high diluted acrylic paints or watercolor pencils. But okay, I had these products at hand, so why not using them if there is no problem? So during the pointing of the walls, I told you that there was a section with a high level of humidity coming from the ground on one corner of the barn. So you see why color planning is important. The pointing procedure was already taking into account that section of humidity, and now we can add this slimy grime product to complete the effect of humidity. So basically this greenish product is applied alongside the pointing lines, so the darker ones that we did previously. I started with the dark tone first, and I completed the job afterwards with the lighter version. The application of these two products is really easy. There is no difficulties. It's just behave like all paints, so you applied the product pure, and afterwards with another paintbrush dipped in white spirit you can fade the colors, you can blend the colors on the base coat. To reinforce the presence of humidity and to increase the rustic aspect of my old barn, I've also decided to add some tuft of grass on the lower part of this front wall. Given we are in the winter period, I've decided to use yellow ochre tuft of grass. That vegetation was put in position and glued with PVA glue. I just used 2 or 3 tufts of grass on this barn. We still need to paint our timber beams. I use the rock grey reference to realize my base coat, on top of which I use these 3 references, pale grey, British khaki and burnt umber, applied like filters, let's say. So that's the succession of different layers of colors that will create the final result. As you can see here again, I work with a reference picture just to help me in the choice of color and to reach the desired effect. When I say that I applied these colors as filters, it's not completely true. Sometimes I apply them as filters and sometimes I applied these colors as washes. The difference between these two techniques is sometimes narrow. I mean, a wash is like you applied more product, more diluted product, and you really wash the surface, whereas in the case of a filter, you remove almost all the product on your paintbrush prior to apply it on the surface. So it's up to you to use one or both combination to reach the desired result. One thing is absolutely certain is that with acrylic colors, you need to work with a wet surface if you want the pigments to blend nicely using the binder, so the water, to travel. The biggest difference as well with the oil paint is that with acrylics you need to apply multiple layers, 5, 6, 10 different layers, very diluted, very thin one on top of each others. You can accelerate the drying process each time with an air dryer. But if, like me, for the moment you have a multiple subject to paint, well, in this case the air dryer is not necessary. Just pass from one subject to the other, leaving the previous layer on the previous subject dry during that interval. You can also work with retarder if you want, because acrylic colors have the tendency to dry quite instantly. Here I didn't use any retarder. I was just working with tap water. Well, here is the final result after the application of all the different layers of colors. I applied the same techniques on the lateral timber beams. For the weathering of the walls, I did not apply any dark wash. I did not want to darken my barn. I was really pleased about the visual result I already reached at that stage. So I've decided to use my watercolor pencils and to use them just like I did for the roof weathering, the slates. So basically I use the same references as described in the roof section, and the procedure is exactly the same. So you just wet the surface that you want to treat, you apply your watercolor pencil, and then later on with another brush, slightly wet, you come and blend the pigments of the pencil with the base coat. The idea is just to create more chromatic variation and to break the monotony of the colors on this barn. Just like old barns, old stone barns that you can find in the real world. Again, here there is no specific pattern to respect, there is no specific color to respect. It's a matter of choice and expected results. Personally, I reproduce some rust streaks that could be the result of the presence of metallic element within the wall. I did some streaking grime below the timber beams. These are spots where dirt could accumulate and then flow on the wall after some rainy periods. So basically there is almost no limits. You have plenty of possibilities, just be creative and use reference pictures. Okay, let's finish this tutorial with our freezing touch. We have two things to deal with, the icicles and the snow. First point, icicles, I use a reference from Notch. I hope I pronounced this word correctly, knock or notch. This is a strange product and it took me some time to learn how to use it. I show you the wrong method, the one I thought it was the correct one. So pressing on the tube to get the product going out and then trying to make it stick to the surface and pull it downwards. This is the wrong method because most of the time the product won't adhere the surface. I tried on different type of surfaces and each time the icicle was not sticking. So this is clearly not the good method, and you will spend a lot of time trying to try a sticky icicle that way. I was insisting so much on that way that I was completely disappointed by the product and I was about to send this tube to the trash can. But you know, I don't give it so fast and I managed to find a solution. The correct way of using this product is to work with a paintbrush. This is a two-step process. First step, you have to apply this product as a kind of coat on the surface you want to treat. So basically, you paint the surface with this product where you intend to put some icicles. For the second step, you use again your paintbrush. You put your icicle on your paintbrush head and then you apply the icicles on the surface. Look, it's magic, it sticks immediately. After this wonderful discovery, it was really a funny process and I spent quite a lot of time to create different type of icicles of different size that I glued almost everywhere around the rooftop and also below the woodpile cover. Now that our icicles are in position, we can start the snow process. This is again a process that requires different steps. I use different references from AK Interactive to create the snow. The first one is Terrain's Snow, which is the main product to create soft snow, the one I'm using now on these slates. Watch out, this is not a standalone product. I mean here, if you use only this product and you leave it to dry, it won't be suitable. The result won't be realistic. It will be too matte and it will lack texture. So you need other references to continue the building process. Another observation with this product is that you cannot work the complete roof, for example, immediately in one operation because the product will dry and it will hamper the next steps. So you have to work by small sections. After this first step, the second step is to apply on top of the snow product a little bit of still water. This is a product which has the consistency of gloss varnish. It's somewhere between gloss varnish and gel. You apply this on top of your snow product. The result is that it will give you the possibility to blend it like I'm doing now, but also it will retard a little bit the drying period and give the snow product more flexibility. It will adhere much less on your paintbrush and you will be able to give it some shape to the snow product. Another advantage of this application of still water is that it will give a gloss finish to the snow product. Watch out here. Yes, now we have a white product that is glossy, but it still lacks volume, and that's where you need to go to the third step. These steps includes the application of snow micro balloons. It's also a reference from AK Interactive. Because the product, the snow product, is still wet, the snow micro balloons will adhere automatically. This is the reason why we cannot work with a too big section at a time. We really work small section by small section to be sure that our snow mixture is still wet at time of application of our snow micro balloons. This product has the consistency of, let's say, something in between flour and powdered sugar. Personally, I do the application above a sheet of paper so that I can recover the excess of micro balloons after application and put it back in the jar. I told you that I had a lot of fun with the knock product to create icicles. Here is another type of use that was interesting in the case of my barn. I simulated the process of melting snow with the snow running down the roof slates progressively. And so this implies, as I said, a melting process. Melting snow equals water. So I really wanted to reproduce the running water on my slates with also the presence of icicles. So simulating therefore the difference between the positive temperature daytime and the freezing temperature during the night. I also created a much bigger icicle on one corner of my barn, and this requires to work step by step, adding sausages of products one above each other until I reach the desired thickness. Now watch out, because during the drying period all these sausages will become thinner. Okay, very last point to finish this tutorial. I told you that my snow was melting during the day and freezing during the night. I could have left the project in this state, but I found that my snow was not shining the way it should shine. I was expecting to get more crystals shining through the snow. Yeah, I know I'm a difficult person. So I've decided to apply a coat of gloss varnish. That one is extra acrylics and is diluted with tap water. I apply quite a thick coat of this varnish and immediately afterwards I apply on top of it this Icicles product from AK. So I just sprayed my gloss varnish with the airbrush. The pressure was 2 bars. I only applied, of course, this varnish on my snowy areas, and as you have seen, I work by very small section because this varnish dries quite quickly. So here again, Icicles require a wet coat to stick to. So here the varnish is our glue, let's say, for these Icicles. The process is very similar to the application of snow micro balloons. Try to work above a sheet of paper so that you can recover the excess of Icicles after application. Well, here it is, guys. This tutorial is over. I hope you enjoyed the content. I know it was again a long video with a lot of information, so I hope you found here the information you were looking for. Do not hesitate to contact me if you have any question, if you need some more information, and to leave your comment in the comment section below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to help me grow this channel. I see you in the next tutorial. Thanks for watching and greetings from Portugal. Ciao, ciao.